The following program was previously recorded.
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Who doesn't love an adventure story? Think Homer's The Odyssey, Herman Melville's Moby Dick, even J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, which is my personal favorite. Adventure stories have long captured our imaginations, drawing us into worlds we might not ever explore ourselves. Some of those adventures are filled with danger and mystery, others excitement and discovery. Today, you'll meet two Connecticut authors taking readers on adventures a bit closer to home, New England to be exact. Ethan Rutherford is the author of North Sun, or The Voyage of the Whale Ship Esther, an adventure novel about the final days of the whaling industry. Ethan, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
We also have with us is Amity Gaige, who's the author of Heartwood, which is a gripping suspense novel about one solo hiker that vanishes on the Appalachian Trail. Amity, welcome to Where We Live.
Thank you so much.
And for our listeners, let us know if you have any questions or if you have any favorite adventure stories that you would like to share with us. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Amity, I want to start with you here. This is your fifth novel, so familiar voyage here. What inspired you to explore the Appalachian Trail?
I love writing about landscapes. My last book was set at sea. This one, I wanted to explore the woods. It's an important part of New England. In fact, I set this book in Maine, or at least the part that's in the Appalachian Trail in Maine, which has 17 million acres of woodlands. So it was a wonderful place to choose if I wanted to explore just this gorgeous, dense, witchy New England woods, and that's a big inspiration for the book.
And so your attachment to nature was part of the inspiration. What about the relationship that is the theme of the novel?
Yeah, well, there are three main characters in the book, three women. One is a hiker who goes missing, I should say, in Maine on the Appalachian Trail. We hear from her through letters she writes to her mother as she waits for rescue. The second character is Lieutenant Beverly Miller, who is a Maine game warden, one of the few female leadership people in leadership in the warden service, and she's leading the search for Valerie. The third character is a woman, a 76-year-old woman living in a retirement community in Connecticut, and she's kind of an armchair sleuth on the case.
I love Lena. She was a great character.
Thank
But tell
you.
us more about Valerie, because it was inspired by someone.
Yes, so there was a story. Once I decided I wanted to set this book in the woods, I wanted it to be a hiker. I wanted to be an Appalachian Trail hiker. The Appalachian Trail is such an iconic part of American life and our imagination. I started to research some narratives of people, and there's many, many narratives of Appalachian Trail hikers. Many people have tried and failed and succeeded. And one was a woman who went missing and was lost for a month, actually, on the Appalachian Trail back in 2013. She was a 66-year-old woman. And sadly, she perished before they could find her. And what was so interesting to me about that story is that she wrote letters while she was waiting. She was a nurse, actually, so she kind of understood what was happening to her as she sort of succumbed to the environment. And she was writing letters, and I haven't read them, but apparently these loving goodbye letters to people. So that was part of what captured my imagination. What would I do in that situation? Who would I write to? And how would I cope?
Yeah, I did think that was a very touching way of telling her story of what's going on, and we're definitely going to go more in depth into it. But Ethan, speaking of the sea, your book centers on whaling ships and its crew, and it is also another iconic I think New England image here, and it's of course set here in New England, and we've seen some major whaling stories over the years as well. So what inspired you to explore this world?
I'm sure that Amity can speak to this as well, but something happens when you sit down to write, you dream yourself into these different spaces. And I found that when I sit down to write, I always just go to the sea, and I go to boats, and I go to water, and I try to dream myself onto those adventures. And so this one came specifically out of a visit to the New Bedford Whaling Museum, which is so wonderful, and it's part of what we have here down in New England. It's so great. Everybody should go. If you get a chance, go to the New Bedford Museum. Bring your kids. They have a wonderful replica of a whaling ship, and they can run around and get lost.
Oh, cool. Mm-hmm.
So I was down there, and I just started sort of imagining, like, what would it mean to sort of go to sea? It's a really difficult book for me to describe because it starts out as a traditional whaling voyage, and then about halfway through, it sort of becomes mythological and becomes strange. But my wife has a good way of sort of describing this book, and I'm grateful to her for this. Where she goes, it's as though Rosemary's Baby and Moby Dick had a baby, and that baby was super concerned about the environment.
That's an amazing description.
Yeah, that's why she's great. That's why I married her. And so that's sort of what this book for me became. It became a way for me to sort of to explore my interest in not only the whaling industry, but about sort of environmental concerns these days.
And so it's interesting because you both kind of chose very, very iconic topics for, I think, New England literature and readers. And Amity, there's also a lot of books, as you know, about hiking, especially over the last couple of years with memoirs like Cheryl Strayed's Wild and Bill Bryson's A Walk in the Woods, which were both turned into movies, and they're both nonfiction. But how did you work on distinguishing this story, separating from the hiking stories from what we've seen in the past?
Well, I did a lot of firsthand research. I did hike parts of the trail. I'm not going to brag because I was only out there for like 4 or 5 nights. But I did do that to try to capture my own impressions of what it's like. And it was amazing just to get a taste. I mean, everyone knew I was fake. They knew.
But that's a lot of nights. That's more nights than a lot of people.
But, and that was all I could do. I'm a total snowflake. I love writing about brave people, but I myself don't know if I would be one of that 25% of people who actually succeed in a through hike. But I meeting the people, meeting Waterfall and Reel, and these are trail names that they, adopt on the trail, and hearing their stories. So same thing for doing the research for writing a game warden. I went to Maine. I got permission to ride along with the wardens, and I had preconceived notions of what I would discover. Like we're gonna go arrest somebody, but the truth is a lot of it was just research. The research yielded things I didn't expect. Stories they told me about a moose that is beloved in a village, or what it feels like to have to inform a family that they've found the body of their loved one. So that research is elemental. It's crucial to me. So I really go to the primary sources, and rather than borrowing somebody else's version of the AT, though fun those books are.
Right.
And if you love Wild, buy my book. Great.
What was the biggest surprise for you?
Surprise in terms
of your research? You mentioned you had some preconceived notions, and you were surprised by some of them, I think.
I think people become human when you spend time with them. They reveal small things that in your imagination and perhaps the stereotypes we see on TV, they're not like that at all. And I love that about the research process, how specific and individuated everybody is.
Well, Ethan, you also dive deep into your research for your book. And one thing that I found really fascinating about both of your novels, is how immersive the experience was for me as a reader. What kind of research did you do, Ethan, to really get into the brutality and just the experiences that the crew goes through?
Oh, just reading and reading and reading and reading. Tons of reading. Obviously, like I love, my favorite thing when people ask the question, like, what about Moby Dick? It's to pretend that I don't know that Moby Dick exists, and be like, there's another book about whaling out there. I fell in love with Moby Dick when I was an undergrad. And it's a fantastic book. I haven't read it since. And for me, it's a book that now kind of exists as this shimmering object in my memory. And I'm not entirely sure if I even remember it correctly. But it was that book that sort of set me on the path of reading more about the whaling industry and what happens after Moby Dick. And so where Moby Dick is a book that's about sort of like abundance and adventure, and it's Shakespearean, and it really sort of like wants the world. As I continue to sort of read these books, and it's like men, ice, and whales, like oil,
Right.
the end of whales. It just sort of keeps going. And what you realize is that after sort of 1850, the American whaling industry really took a dive, and they'd hunted these whales nearly towards to extinction. And so my book sort of started to become very early on about scarcity. And they used to have to go on these. So the book starts in New England, but it goes all the way up and sort of around Cape Horn up to the Chukchi Sea in Alaska, which is where they used to have to go hunt the whales because that's where they'd chase them to.
Well, I felt like I can smell the sea air and the blubber and the whale oil as I'm reading it. Have you heard, is that what you picture when you're imagining your stories?
Yes, that is. And that immersive experience that you're talking about, Amity does that incredibly. I hate hiking. But I felt like I had already, when I read Amity's book, I loved it. I felt like I'd actually completed a huge part of the Appalachian Trail. And what you're trying to do when you write is create an immersive experience for the reader, and then sort of engage their senses. And so for me, the process of being a writer is it really is like you sort of close your eyes, you stay very still, and you just let yourself sink into the depths. And then you just ask, what does this smell like? What does this feel like? What does this taste like? What do I hear? And then you try to put little brushstrokes of that on the page.
Well, and Amity, because sharing your character, Valerie, who was a nurse, and this was also another component of the novel is the impact the pandemic had on healthcare workers. And so the main character, Valerie, as we talked about, was a trauma nurse during the pandemic, and we're just kind of starting to see a lot of literature inspired by what we all went through collectively over the last couple of years. How did you explore this in your novel? What drove you to want that to be sort of like a theme?
Yeah. Well, it was a bunch of serendipity, I guess, in a way. The reason I made Valerie a nurse initially is because the woman whose story kind of sparked this book was a nurse.
Right.
But I began this book before the pandemic. And what was so interesting to me, I mean, Ethan didn't have to worry about this with his, his 1800s setting, but anyone who was writing a book during the pandemic had to then contend with the fact that our lives had been completely changed. It wasn't just that our lives had changed, our themes had changed. And so I found myself with a character who was a nurse. I was initially going to set it back in early in the 2000s, and I set it in 2022 and decided that she was hiking the Appalachian Trail to sort of, as one hiker once said, walk off the war. A lot of people on the Appalachian Trail are they're in a period of transition or healing from addiction or prison or divorce, many, many things. So it actually makes total sense that this nurse would be trying to heal from her time, sadly having to, help people die, and how that was terrible. I did a lot of research also as well, listening to first responders, especially medical professionals, who talked about this sense of moral injury that they felt because they were doing so poorly at keeping people alive, and they were understaffed, and how terrible that felt to them in terms of their ideals of what they wanted to be as a medical professional. So that was sort of the hardest thing for some people. It wasn't just the exhaustion. They didn't feel like heroes. They actually felt like, I wish I could do better, but I can't. I'm overwhelmed. So the COVID exists as a shadow subject in the book. It really doesn't get a lot of airtime, but it overlays the whole thing. And I feel like we're just at the beginning of starting to heal from COVID and from the confusion and the hurt around that. So I think this book taps into the feeling, the different ways that we all felt lost during the pandemic.
Well, it is interesting to hear you say that you almost set the novel earlier in the 2000s, because I did actually find myself wondering what would have it been like if it was set at a different time. Like, I did find it fascinating that it was set in our sort of contemporary time. So I think that hits really different. And Ethan didn't have that problem, as Amity mentioned, in the 1800s. But I would love for you to get into your characters as well. But anything you want to respond to?
Yeah, well, no, so Amity and I were talking last night, and Amity said something that I thought was really interesting, where she said, I don't think we've even really started to begin to heal from COVID. And I was thinking about this and how, what is a COVID novel? What does this mean? And I wrote this book, at least partially during COVID. And I didn't have to worry. It's a historical novel, and it's set in,
there are other things during that time.
Yes, exactly.
Especially when you're at sea.
Right. But it did become a book about isolation. Right. And so it's clear that I was trying to work through my sense of what does it mean to be fully alone? What does it mean to be sort of in an enclosed space that is surrounded by sort of this vast space, so like a boat on water? And so it really is interesting. I think you're right, Amity, that COVID, and that sense of sort of loneliness and isolation, in the sense that the world that you knew it can very quickly just get stripped away and moved into sort of a place of scarcity, like emotional scarcity. And it's something that actually did play out very much in my book, even though there's sort of a big talking bird god who comes in at the end.
We love a talking bird god. So, we want to get into the journey, too, throughout this conversation, but I would love for you to talk more about your characters, because we do sort of follow a Captain Lovejoy, who is heading up this specific expedition, and then a crew, and then also some boys. Tell us about these characters and what inspired you to create them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in a lot of ways, talking to Amity about her book, where she has these three characters who are moving the book forward, and in that way you're sort of dead reckoning the novel. There are three spheres of storytelling in my book as well. There's Captain Lovejoy, who sort of begins the book and sort of begins on solid land in New Bedford, and you're sort of in a fairly traditional narrative. And then as soon as the boat leaves, these two cabin boys take over. And the book very much becomes about their experience aboard the Esther, which is the ship, as they sort of go around, and they have expectations about what this journey is going to be like and the adventure that they're going to see. And then very quickly they're confronted with the brutality and the reality of what the whaling sort of industry is, and that is deeply upsetting to them. And then there's sort of a third consciousness, which is the Esther herself, and kind of the strange mythology of the sea that starts to attach itself to the boat as it goes. In my interest in those characters, it was because I was interested in looking at this experience of brutality on the water, and I needed it from these different perspectives. One, from somebody who's like deeply invested in enacting that brutality. So you have the captain who's sort of there, and then the ship owners. One that is kind of looking at it from a more sort of innocent point of view and coming to understand just how brutal it actually is. And then one that is just kind of like outside of time, that can sort of place it in history a little bit.
Well, it reminds me of certain war literature where you read about there's a romanticization of the experience, right? Like, I want to go on a ship, I want to go travel and adventure in Wales, but then usually reality is not what you romanticize it to be. Did that play a role, especially with the boys?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And in some ways that was me talking to myself, because I was like, I would really love to be a whaler. That's part of being a writer is to go, I want to put myself in these impossible situations, and wouldn't that be fun? And then you realize the more that you read, you go, no, it actually isn't. It's boredom, it's tedium, punctuated by moments of total panic, and it is unbelievably brutal and cruel. I became a vegetarian after doing sort of this research over the process of this book. It's really bleak.
I would need a lot of Dramamine. I would not be able to survive it.
Yeah.
I think in Ethan's book, there's these two beautiful young boys who are, what's their role? They're just, they're mates.
They're sort of the cabin boys. They
The
just are sort of
cabin
there, and they just run and they help everyone around. They sort of sharpen the instruments and do whatever they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
While witnessing what was going on.
Yeah. You see things through their eyes, and because of their vulnerability of their situation, you feel very emotionally attached to them. I mean, I identified with them through the boys with this experience.
Right, and then you touched on it, Amity, a little bit earlier, because you also have multiple characters. We're learning about Valerie's disappearance and the experience of multiple characters trying to find her. So with the multiple point of view, how did you pull in so many different perspectives, and did you know that was going to happen? Because oftentimes it feels like Valerie is not necessarily the main character, but she represents a lot of things that everyone else is trying to find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's symbolically and literally important to everybody. But you're totally right. This book has a kind of choral effect, and it isn't just the main three characters. There's my other hiker, Santo, who gets a lot of chance to come to talk about his relationship with Valerie. But yes, I was interested in this idea of just polyphony, that there would be multiple voices singing the same song. And I really I got a lot of pleasure out of having these extra textual bits, whether it's a police bulletin or a tip line phone call, and sometimes they're for comic relief.
Well, there was the one from the psychic that it was almost a little too real. Like I wanted to laugh, but it's not a very funny thing to laugh at, but I kind of had to.
Right. And, at the time, one thing I liked about this polyphony was it's sort of fun to read, it's energetic, but also it gives the reader the opportunity to piece together the book as they're going and to see, oh, here's a new tidbit. How does that increase my understanding? What piece of the puzzle is this? And so I appreciate that as a reader myself when I'm given a little space to put it together myself and to ponder. I did some time thinking about the ends. There's a bunch of short chapters, just like with Ethan's book, actually. And the white space at the end of that is this little moment of meditation. Okay, why did we just hear about that? Why are we now pivoting over here? So there's many pivots in the book, and it was just fun to write.
Yeah, I mean, with the tip line, it did make me realize that what the dispatchers have to feel through. What are good information and what are not great information to go through. So new appreciation for that. You've been listening to Amity Gaige, who's the author of 4 books, including her latest, Heartwood, and also Ethan Rutherford, who's the author of North Sun, or The Voyage of the Whale Ship Esther. You can learn more about their books by visiting our website, ctpublic.org/wherewelive. And we want to know what you're reading right now, or if you have any favorite adventure stories that you'd like to share, give us a call, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. This hour, we're hearing from 2 local authors bringing a sense of adventure and introspection to readers in New England and beyond. Amity Gaige is the author of 4 books, including her latest novel, Heartwood, and Ethan Rutherford, who is the author of the debut novel, North Sun, or The Voyage of the Whale Ship Esther. So Amity and Ethan, what struck me with both of your novels is it gave me a really heavy sense of disorientation. And so the whole time I'm like, this is not relaxing, but I need to know what happens. So I just kept turning the page. So Amity, how did you explore and create a world that's about being lost and found and maybe being lost again?
Well, I had to learn a lot myself about that. I did read some rather boring books about lost person behavior, some manuals that my friends at the Warden Service gave me that gave case study after case study of how certain people get lost and actually different people get lost differently. Like little children, they get lost like butterflies. They don't have a plan. They just flit around, so they're very hard to find. Or some, say, a lost hunter might travel directionally because he's confident that he knows where he's going, but he is actually quite lost. So lost person behavior was so fascinating. I think we have no idea how bad we would be without our GPS, without our modern machines. We would have zero tolerance just also for the state of lostness. Because the state of lostness is something we're not used to. I mean, I use my phone everywhere to get everywhere. If I didn't have that, I have no innate understanding of orientation. It's definitely something we have lost. But so people who get out there, and in the case, often there's not cell service in these places. And for the first time, people are experiencing something our ancestors would have known and respected a great deal in the past. So it was a lot of that learning that helped me understand one thing, that there were numerous things that I discovered that's helpful when lost. One thing you are supposed to try to do is remain calm. Now that's very difficult, but when you're anxious, you have this like vagal response, and your adrenaline and your heart rate starts to expend energy, and then you can't think straight. So, one thing I, wanted to have Valerie do was to be able to, in some ways, stay calm, and oddly, to even appreciate the beauty that surrounded her. This can also help the lost person, a sort of a radical presence to where you are. Because if you're present that way, you might actually see something, a solution. And if you're anxious, or if you're, desperate, you might not actually be able to save yourself. So there's reasons this sort of spiritual calm can actually save your life.
Well, we're glad for any tips to stay calm, so that can be our next thing. But Ethan, you're navigating a different kind of disorientation, literally at sea. You mentioned building that sense of loss and isolation. So what was your philosophy behind working that into your novel? Because the land is expansive, but the sea, a different kind of expansion.
Yeah, there is a different kind of expansion there, where you can see all of it, but you have no idea what's directly under it, right? There's so much that's hidden. And the sense of disorientation, at least for me, it became really interesting. So it's a sea voyage narrative, just like in Amity's these are journeys. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so you have a very sturdy vessel that you can put your obsessions and the things that you're thinking about, and you can essentially sort of pack your backpack in Amity's case, or for me, it's packing the hold of a ship, right?
Right.
And when you're writing, whether you mean to or not, as you're sitting there, and to get to the finish line, your life just sort of intrudes and comes into the book. And for me, this disorientation that became really interesting, the book didn't work for me until I started to think of the character as somebody who's losing track of their own story, losing the sense of what it was that they're supposed to do out there, and sort of being confronted by sort of the enormity of what's being asked of them. But there are two versions, I think, of a book, and I wonder if Amity could sort of speak. There's the book that you send out to people, and people are like, oh, this is a book about whaling. And you go, yeah, that's right, it really is. But for me, this is a book about the deeply personal side of this. Is about my dad is in memory care right now. And as I was writing this, he was moving from sort of being a person who was walking around independently to somebody who had kind of lost the thread of his own life. And that was something that I was having a very difficult time thinking through and trying to imagine, but it was on my mind all the time. And then before I knew it, it swept into the book and became part of the book's DNA. And so for me, this is a book that is examining the ways in which deterioration functions.
And was there any of that thread of thought that sort of continued your narrative of, we did start out with people who were so sure of what they were getting themselves into. And then I guess it's a little bit of speaking of the romanticization that we talked about earlier, and your own desire to breathe the sea air, to be at the ocean, and you dreamed yourself into this space. And then, because you do you start to see the characters start to lose their, not necessarily sanity, but they start to lose their direction quite literally.
Yeah, they lose the thread and they lose their bearings, and they're sort of wondering, what is it that we're supposed to be doing out here anyway? And in this very particular case, it's the end of the whaling industry, and they've already discovered gas and petroleum. So what they're doing makes no sense anyway. They're just killing things.
Well, I mean, we have been focusing so much on disorientation, but also there is a sense of home. And I want to get to Amity in a little bit, because I think the trails have become home for a lot of hikers. But what about for people who long for the ship and the sea? Do you think the ocean / the ship can be a home for your characters? Or was it a home for them for a while?
Oh, it was definitely a home for my characters, particularly the boys. I mean, that's where they'll sort of always live, I think. I mean, it's where they've had those memories. And Amity, could I ask you actually to read the wonderful epigraph for your book that I think actually really speaks to what we're talking about here, that there's a sense of that both books are kind of like about endurance, and they're about sort of stripping things away, and they're about losing yourself. But then at the end of it, there does a sort of clarity does come. And I wonder if the epigraph to your book actually, I think, speaks to this perfectly.
This is by Louise Glick, who I was very lucky to get to know before she passed away recently. This is from her poem, October. A wind has come and gone, taking apart the mind. It has left in its wake a strange lucidity. How privileged you are to be passionately clinging to what you love. The forfeit of hope has not destroyed you.
It's as if you're reading each other's minds.
I love Ethan.
So on the topic of home, trails, hikers, is there any paralleling with that? Sort of the idea of a found family?
I think so, for sure. There are a lot of, as I was saying, a lot of people on the AT are going through a period of transition. And there are also a lot of non-traditional hikers. You know, we think of a lot of people out there in the outdoors as like, thin white people. And it's not all true. That's not true. Mm-hmm. There's wonderful growing diversity in outdoors and outdoor adventure. And so I think that it becomes more of people go to the AT, they think they're going to be totally alone, and they are a lot. Mm-hmm. But really what a lot of them gain are these incredibly close bonds with one another. And there's this name for it. It's their tramily, your
right.
trail family. And I think that surprises a lot of AT hikers. And I think when you're stripped away from your material possessions and your status and whatever you're running from, and you're just there with other human beings in nature, without your tech, without mirrors to evaluate your own body or see yourself, a lot of them express that's just a really profound intimacy with themselves and with others. And in adult life, I mean, there's not a lot of opportunity to have these kinds of experiences and to transform. So even though I'm not going to do it myself, I really understand why people want to take that journey.
Sure. Well, before we go to break, I got to ask Ethan, did this conversation change your idea of hiking at all?
Yeah. Maybe this summer I'll do it. It really, I'll try not to get lost though.
Yeah, baby steps. Do a small trail. You don't have to do the AT. There's no rules here, I think. Well, you've been listening to Ethan Rutherford, who's the author of North Sun, and also Amity Gaige, who's the author of Heartwood, and they'll be staying with us. Connecticut Public is having its pledge drive. Consider supporting Where We Live and all of your favorite programming and shows with a donation. You can visit ctpublic.org/donate. And I'll be back in a moment to tell you more.
You're listening to a broadcast of a previously recorded program.
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Today, we're joined by two local authors bringing us on fictional adventures here in New England. Amity Gaige is the author of Heartwood, and Ethan Rutherford is the author of North Sun. So we have a very short period of time together here today. So before we let you go, tell us what you're reading right now, Ethan.
I am reading student work at the moment. It is thesis time at Trinity College where I teach. But I mean, let me recommend Heartwood by Amity Gaige, which was the last book I actually read, which is not a lie, because we did an event together at the Mark Twain House. It was really wonderful. But a book that I've been recommending to there's two books I've been recommending to everybody that I think everybody should read. One is called Tongues by Anders Nilsson, and it's a graphic novel that's sort of a retelling of Greek mythology, but it's so beautiful and strange and great. And then the other book is called Loved and Missed by Susie Boyd, which is about parenthood and sort of estrangement, but it's so, I don't know. When you read, do you like to cry?
It depends. I mean, I have been traumatized by a lot of the novels I've read. I don't know why I keep going back to them, though.
I love it when I wake up and go, why am I weeping? And then I go, wow, at least I still have that mechanism. That's nice.
That's a good reminder.
But Loved and Missed, I couldn't recommend it any more highly. I think it's the book of the last 3 years. It's great.
What about you, Amity?
Well, I'm going to have to second Ethan here. I am also reading student work for thesis time at Yale. I also reading the books of my amazing interlocutors, like North Sun by this man here sitting next to me. And I can't recommend it highly enough. Also, just the language is just so beautiful. Talk about poetry. A Strange Eventful History, which is the book by Claire Massoud, who I'm going to appear with tonight in Boston. And then strangely, randomly, I am reading a biography of Flannery O'Connor.
We love a random read.
Brad Gooch, and I am loving it. Sometimes I think it's very orienting for me to read biographies of other writers when I'm either up or down. My personal fortunes or misfortunes. I remember there are other people who've come before me. They have figured things out. They have been brave when they needed to. They have made changes when they needed to. So I draw a lot of inspiration from her.
I'm sure it's helpful, too, to learn about their own process.
Definitely.
Or the 300 rejection slips they got. You're like, all right, not too bad, I think. What about your writing routines? Do you have a routine, Ethan?
Yeah, when I'm deep in a project, I do. And I have two kids. I guess they're not so little anymore, but they still need to be fed. And so if I want to get any writing done, I usually have to wake up quite early in the morning. So I get up at 4:30. But I like it. It's like I'm in my own little ship. And it's dark and the windows are sort of closed. And it gives you those 2 hours. No one's emailing you. Nobody's calling you. It's the time that I can really actually sort of submerge down into that kind of imaginative space. And like Amity, I also love reading about sort of other writers and like their work habits, because you realize that everyone is just kind of flailing their way through. Sure. There are periods where you really have a schedule and it works, and there's other periods where you just are thinking. And I need to hear from other writers to tell me that those thinking periods are okay and that they're part of the process.
Right. It's kind of like walking. I think walking is a thing that a lot of writers recommend other writers to do, is also your thinking time.
It used to be smoking, but you can't do that anymore.
Well,
those were the days.
Those were the days. And I think one of my favorite routines was from Truman Capote, who apparently wrote lying down. That's a skill, I think. I feel like
I would just fall asleep these
I think
days.
I would too, but I might be working my abs too at the same time. I'd imagine. But so what's next for both of you? You're both sort of on this book tour-esque adventure. Anything that you would like to tell our listeners to look forward to?
Oh, well, I am really wonderfully busy going around, getting to talk about this book, of making a little appearance on the Today Show. And so I'm thrilled. And that's everything I'm doing, that and trying to also see the family. And I think it's going to take a long time to understand what the next book is going to be about, to settle down and begin again, because you feel you have a very brief moment when you finish a book where you're like, yay, I did it.
Right.
And then you start to see that uphill climb starts again. As long as it's a privilege, but that's where I am at the bottom of the next very tall mountain.
I have just gotten done sort of doing a bunch of readings and traveling around, and I'm thrilled to just be back here and sort of just trying to get through the rest of the semester. But I did want to say to everybody listening, is that there are wonderful independent spots here in Connecticut, and if you like literature in your life, if you like sort of novels and poetry and all this stuff, be sure that you actually get out to these events and support your local bookstores. Because if you don't, it's surprising, but they just go away, and then there's nothing for you. And so I don't know if it would be okay, but I just wanted to sort of say quickly, like, check out the Mark Twain House. They have wonderful readings. Riverbend Bookstore sponsors a lot of like terrific readings. Real Artways, which is a terrific art space here in Hartford. They put on all sorts of fantastic events and have my favorite movie theater, besides, I guess, Cinestudio at Trinity College. And then you also have you're going to the Odyssey Bookstore and R.J. Julia. So get out there and support literature.
Well, we do love our local spaces. And about 30 seconds here, Amity, any final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Oh, I just wanted to second everything Ethan just said so beautifully. There are a lot of artists here in Connecticut. I'm part of the Authors Guild, which is a wonderful organization that supports writers. We have 369 members in Connecticut, many traditionally published, some self-published. There's also just a lot of people who are creating art in this state, and sometimes it's a side hustle, and they're doing like what Wallace Stevens did, going to their jobs in insurance, but also writing beautiful stuff at home. So, here's to them.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us. You were listening to Amity Gaige, who's the author of Heartwood, and Ethan Rutherford, who's the author of North Sun. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. And as you all know, our annual fund drive is here. Consider supporting Where We Live and all of your favorite programming with a donation. And once again, I'll be back in a moment to tell you more.